The Mallee region of northwest Victoria has long provided the landscape for broadacre grain. From the early 1900s through to post-World War II, the region was established as a centre for grain production. The region now accounts for 75% of total grain production in Victoria. Initial farming practices in the Mallee caused it to become one of the worst eroded areas in Australia. Low fertility reserves, overcropping, and loss of topsoil to wind erosion heavily reduced the ability of the area to sustain profitable farming operations.
The farming techniques in this area particularly was just relied on cultivation, which was just the farming method used in England, or where most of our forebears in this area came from. And unfortunately, wind erosion was the killer, as it has been in most of the Mallee, and it took up until probably the 1990s for something to take over from this conventional tillage, and where we just, and of course it was what we call now as minimum tillage or no-till, where we don't cultivate the soil at all, and the only time we do disturb the soil is when we sow our crops with narrow points into standing stubbles left from the harvest prior. And of course we don't have a 3-year rotation, we have cropping regime, we crop every paddock every year.
The development of more efficient farming systems, new crop varieties and technological advances has increased yields and reduced labour use.
It's been a great benefit, this sort of farming land, which is quite light in soil type, that to have wind erosion eliminated. And what I used to think was the worst soil, what I called the worst soil, was the stuff that wouldn't blow when you worked it 10 times with a cultivator. And when the wind blew and you know, you lost bloody tons of valuable topsoil in windstorms. Well, now we've eliminated that, and that's probably the most pleasing thing for me. We do rely on a lot of chemicals, and that's a bit sad, but that's how it is. And hopefully, I think there's a great future in farming for the time being, if the climate holds out another century or so.
As cropping technology and farming methods improved, farmers wishing to expand their operations in the pursuit of productivity has had a dramatic effect on the farming community.
And of course, and that's another thing that's happened with the modern technology, it's led to farmers, when all these blocks get sold and people who are marginal farming with perhaps not marginal skills but marginal attitudes towards the new systems sell up, and the neighbours buy them and the farms get bigger, and this has a big consequence on our towns and football clubs. You know, the Yarpeet Football Club probably closed folded in 1999, probably because which had been going since 1910, probably because the farms just got bigger and there was just less people working and in the area, or less families, and it affects the schools too, and the numbers have dropped probably since the 60s, probably have dropped over 100%. There was probably 350 students now between the two schools at Rainbow, and now there's probably only 120. But that's changed, and we can't, that's how it's happened, that's where we're at. But I think productivity of the Mallee's never been better. We're growing much more food, and although probably cropping is probably the most popular form of farming these days, whereas in the early times it was cattle, pigs and sheep, and mainly to feed the families. But nowadays, you know, we live out of the supermarket. People don't even grow their own vegetables that much, or fruit even.
Over a 40-year period prior to 2002, the number of farms in the Wimmera and Mallee region almost halved, and the average farm size increased by almost 100%. What's the biggest period of growth you've seen from the farm?
I see photos of what the farm used to look like, and I actually struggled to picture, I struggled to imagine what that would have been like. So we probably missed the worst of those erosion years, but even what we've seen in the last 10 years with the farming methods has been incredible. The change and the productivity of some of our farm that, when we weren't cropping those patches at all when we first come home. Gradually they went from growing not much to now they're not far behind some of the rest of our...
It's probably, some of the most reliable dirt that we have now is the stuff, I think Dad said it earlier, the stuff that was considered not very good many years ago.
Also with the technology now, with the auto steer and everything else, the stuff that's been really good too, and I think probably the younger farmers have really picked that up probably more so. I know it's only came in recently, but...
Well, that's right, and it's getting cheaper all the time to get set up with it, but it makes things a lot more efficient.
As holdings grow larger and yields increase, adapting farming methods to utilise new technology is critical.
Years ago, the farms were small, and the growers, or the farmers, the old timers that worked those farms, were in tune with their land, probably more so than we are these days. They knew exactly what different parts of what paddock did what in certain years. Now, with the increase of scale of these operators, it's becoming harder and harder to be as in tune with the land as our forefathers were. So that's where technology like EM38, yield mapping, soil sampling, satellite imagery, drones will become more and more relevant, because in order to us to keep producing and to get the most out of what we've got, technology is definitely going to have to start being used in substitute for local knowledge or for years of experience on smaller scales. I think we need to get more efficient than what we are at the moment, and technology is a way to enable us to be able to do that by understanding our soils better, tailoring inputs to different soil types, and also to be able to potentially save on a little bit of labour cost. I can see productivity going up within the area that we have. I don't think that the area will need to get any smaller. In fact, with the growing population of the world, I think the importance on us growing more food on the area we've got has never been stronger. It really is a case of get efficient or you won't be in business in the long term. The broadacre grain market, or grain sales, is no longer dictated really by domestic pricing or influences. It is to a certain degree, but most of the commodities we deal in, the pricing is based on a world scale. So the increased use of technology is one way that we can get more efficient to compete with these countries that do have a lower labour cost. Russia's certainly becoming more and more of a competitor to Australian exports in grains. Their labour costs are considerably less than ours, so it's going to be more and more important for us to grow more tonnages more efficiently on the acres that we have currently.
So what emerging technologies do you think will be the biggest game changers?
Yeah, so autonomous tractors is probably the way we think the future may lie, and the particular kit that we sell does fit onto an existing tractor, so you do have the use of the tractor as a standard tractor, but in addition to that we can also have the ability through the use of GPS, once again, radar and laser, to be able to work those tractors completely driverless, which obviously in some areas where labour, skilled labour or any labour in some areas is hard to find, guys are seeing a huge benefit in that.
Although improvements in technology and farming methods once fueled the decline of small farming communities in the Mallee, they had proven to be a necessity for sustaining agriculture and remaining viable as an operator in the region.
All those things are going to put, I mean, autonomous tractors obviously put some labour out of,
That's right,
make
that's
it redundant.
out of.
Yeah, and they make it that little bit easier to take one more block on when it comes up.
That's
so
right.
I don't think there's any stopping this happening.
No.
That's the way that it is, unfortunately.
I guess that's the way it's always been. Like even back in the day, they were always making slightly bigger tractors and stuff. Where, like in the 1920s, a bigger tractor had come out and replaced the 2 tractors the farm had. So, sort of always been that way. It's just keep going that way.
Just hopefully, but all those things like they do have trouble with population decline, but they do make things hopefully more sustainable. So I don't think the farming environment here is not going to get easier; it's going to get tougher with
For sure.
the climate change.
Yeah,
that's happening. So I think as long as these things can make us more viable, then I don't think we can. I think it'll be a good thing.
Yeah, that's right. It's not like a farmer. Like, it could put labour. More often than not, a farmer will try and do the job work 18 hours a day and just get very minimal sleep at cropping and harvest. And like that's probably more what the autonomous tractors and things will do, is just give you more of a normal type of life. You might only have to work an 8-hour day and let the sort of tractor do the rest, rather than, like, it's hard at the minute to find skilled labour, especially to tractors and that are getting pretty complicated. So it's hard to expect anyone to be able to learn it up and just work for 4 weeks and then be out of a job again. So I think it'll,
And there's always limits to what farmers, how much they can take on, so it won't. Not everyone's out to expand indefinitely, so it's got to be capped somewhere, hopefully. Things feel at the moment like they're relatively stable around Rainbow.
being able to actually extract a crop from some of the most unproductive land, that's going to continue. And in the face of maybe less water or different conditions, you think this is a system that can be turned to, whereas other systems might fail in the face of changing climate?
Our whole system is based around pretty well using every drop of moisture that we get. If it's summer rains, it means spending a lot of money spraying summer weeds, but knowing that you're probably not going to get a crop unless you do that.
A lot of research gets done too, so you know what things cost and if it's going to return money, like it does.
Do you think farming operations are kind of in conflict with the community at the moment in terms of expanding operations and that pursuit of productivity? Or?
I guess it's a hard one because the town was put there as a services for farmers, I guess, so it's still doing its job, and I guess it certainly affects it. It gets smaller, but I mean, the Rainbow's in a pretty good position. There's not very many empty houses. There's not many houses for sale, so it's
So it's a pretty optimistic community about
it is.
Really,
it's certainly changed. The town, it's more that like the school shrink, because be a lot of people living out on farms, which is just hardly any now that would have come into town. So the town itself, I guess, is still okay.
Do you think some towns sort of are in trouble? Or?
It's hard to tell. You definitely drive through some towns and you think that they are doing it a lot tougher than what we are. I don't know if that's just without the local knowledge, and maybe they think that about Rainbow, but Rainbow just feels, I don't know, it does feel like we've got a little bit of a spirit hanging, or even building now, I think. And you see a lot of the businesses, like they all invest money into their business. Well, most of them. Yeah. So everyone's obviously optimistic that there's a future there.
I still think, towns like it's still got a good contribution to make to producing food and being a viable kind of food source.
think so, yeah. I mean, like as we've been saying, like it's the land's been getting more and more productive as it's probably the years have been getting harder.
In recent years, as much as 47 million hectares of agricultural land has been lost to the rural lifestyle property market, timber production, conservation or mining. As the farming industry begins to deal with the challenges of a changing climate, the agricultural capacity of dryland cropping landscapes like the Mallee may prove to be vital for food production. Dryland farming innovation will be of particular importance for food security as conditions continue to get tougher and more traditional methods of farming are challenged.
Generally, technology or improvements in farming methods and changes have come through necessity, and we generally find that the most efficient operators are the ones in the lower rainfall areas, because other than I suppose if you're down in the Western District and it rains every year, you can continue to do what you've been doing and you'll still make money and you'll still grow crops, whereas in the dry areas it's more and more important to become efficient, and the uptake in technology, especially variable rate, is more prevalent, we find, in the drier areas, and those guys are generally the more efficient operators, and the reason for that is they need to be, because if they're not becoming more efficient, then with less and less rainfall, whether you believe in climate change or not, in my opinion, it's certainly, I've experienced it on our property, and the more efficient you can become, the more likely you are to be sustainable in the long term with a changing climate.
Rainbow provides an example of a stronger community that has evolved in the face of a changing farming landscape and declining population services. As farming innovation was once applied to improve the viability of food production in the Mallee, innovative and resilient communities like Rainbow will ensure the region's continued productivity and sustainability into the future.